And now we have American football popples, soccer popples, basketball popples, new sports popples. What could be more popular?
Centurion!
Destruction is my evil aim. First Jake Rockwell, then the world. I need backup.
Power extreme! The fusion of man and machine.
Take that, hacker.
Centurions!
Welcome, listeners of Illusion, to episode 2 of Temporal Discussion, the episode-by-episode retrospective podcast about everybody's favourite kids' TV show, Nightmare. I'm Martin Harder, and apparently I find it harder to press a record button than most people.
And I'm Martin O'Doney, and I find it O'Donier to press the record button than most people.
For clarity, we actually have recorded this already. Well, we talked about it already. We talked about it for an hour and 45 minutes. We didn't record it already because Muggins here forgot to press the record button.
I am not in any way bitter, I promise. I can see you on the screen in front of me at the moment, and I do want to put my hand through it and sort of throttle you, but apart from that, I'm not bitter.
Any excuse to carry on talking about Nightmare.
That's true. And as I said a moment ago, we were only practicing. It wasn't real. It was never intended to be the real thing.
Exactly. So, did you ever apply to go on the show?
First time we did this, I gave a very long dramatic build-up and then said no, I didn't. The closest I came to it was at school. I think it was 1988, whilst the second season was being broadcast. I say friends, they weren't particularly nice to me. So some of my classmates were trying to form a team, and they were going to apply to appear on Nightmare the following year. I asked if I could join them, and they said, well, unfortunately, there's already 4 of us, but we'll keep you in the background as an understudy if we need one. But that's about as close as I ever came, I'm afraid.
I did want to go on the show, but as I said before, I was at the stage of my life where I was way too young to be on it.
Yeah.
I actually believed that they were killing these kids.
Did you?
Bringing them back to life, obviously.
Oh, right, okay. You're taking it that literally.
I believed in it full-heartedly that they were killing these kids, but it was okay because they were bringing them back to life. And though I did actually want to be on the show, I didn't really want to die either, even if I was being brought back to life.
You didn't want the temporary mortal agony. It's okay.
I didn't want to be ground up between giant cogs or have a circular saw blade go through me.
Well, I think looking back on it, that would actually have been a really spectacular way to go, though, wouldn't it? I think it was far more glorious than dying of old age or anything like that.
It would be something for the obituary, yeah.
Really heroic looking, really dramatic.
So today we're looking at Series 1, Episode 2. It's September the 14th, 1987. I double-checked this time, and whilst Rick Astley seems like he's never going to give up the #1 single spot, we have a new film at the top of the box office, The Untouchables.
Robert De Niro is Al Capone.
There is violence in Chicago, of course, but not by me and not by anybody I employ, and I'll tell you why, because it's not good business.
Kevin Costner is Elliot Ness.
I have sworn to put this man away with any and all legal means at my disposal, and I will do so.
Sean Connery is Jimmy Malone.
You want to get Capone? Here's how you get him. He pulls a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way.
I can't really say much about it because I haven't seen it.
I'm in my mid-40s now. I think I saw it back at some point in my early 20s, or I saw the first few minutes of it, and I just got bored and turned over. I'm sure some people are going to say that I've got no tastes. I think my tastes have probably become more refined since then, so maybe I would sit through it today, but never got round to it so far, and I was bored then. Are we done talking about things we haven't done now?
And so without further ado, let's crack on with the show.
Welcome, Watchers of Illusion, to the Castle of Confusion. Phase across time with us once more, for this is the age of adventure.
It's Traegard again, and he greets us and welcomes us to the Castle of Confusion. As mentioned in the first podcast, if you decide to binge watch the first season, get ready to see that same sequence an awful lot, because they basically use that bit for every single episode apart from the first one. And the outro at the end of the episode, they use for every single episode except the final one. So just a heads up for people there. So he invites us to phase across time once more. I assume that means travel through time, and that this is the age of adventure. What century that is, we're never told. The books imply that it's the end of the 12th century, but it could be any time. It could be any number of centuries. He refers to us as armchair adventurers, which I take great offence at, just because I'd never even heard of Nightmare at this point until about a week earlier. So the implication that we're not brave is a bit of an assumption, I think. Because armchair adventurers appears to be what we today would call keyboard warriors, while others braver than ourselves challenge the secrets of his lair. Look, I never applied to appear on Nightmare in any of its 8 seasons, and I think that proves that I'm brave. I haven't figured out how it proves that I'm brave yet, but I think it does.
I think in my case, I've just admitted that I'm not brave enough.
Oh yeah, you're not brave. I'm saying that goes without saying. I'm brave. I just haven't figured out how. I haven't figured out how the evidence works yet. That's all.
Shall we talk about this little recap?
Yeah, the Dungeon Ditty, it's called. This happened at the beginning of most episodes throughout the first 3 seasons. It's a rather entertaining little sequence you get, where you get sort of screenshots from different moments in the previous episode with the credit music playing in the background, and Treguard basically explains what happened on last week's show to rhymes. He explains it in rhyming language. I always found it rather pleasant. So I rather enjoyed it, especially with having the music in the background, because I do love the theme tune for Nightmare. After 3 seasons, they got rid of it, and they introduced an assistant to work with Treguard in the 4th season. And by and large, the assistant would, after that, would basically give an update, not in rhymes, not with any music, and not very interestingly. I think the reason they changed it was simply because Tim Child, he was the producer, but he was also the writer. I think he got fed up of trying to think up rhymes all the time for each update, so it was just easy just to write something out straight in a prose form and get somebody just to read it out loud. But I think it's a shame. As I say, I quite like the Dungeon Ditties.
And now time turns, the fire burns, time out is gone, the quest is on.
So this obviously is where we left the team last time, having just completed the puzzle. Before they exit, Treguard warns them that the path ahead may be mined, and that they should be careful as explosions leave an awful mess, and they've been having a problem with the cleaners lately.
That's Treguard to a T, isn't it? No, I don't want anything terrible to happen to you, because then I've got to clean the mess up afterwards. It's actually a bit of an old joke, to be perfectly honest. There was an episode of Blackadder just a year earlier where Blackadder gets shot by the Duke of Wellington, and Baldric shows enormous concern and then says, I want to get these clothes into soak. Blood's hell to remove. It's the same joke there, really. You get it in a lot of things. It does sum up Treguard's sort of nature. He's never sorry to see someone in trouble.
So we didn't really get much chance to get to know the team last episode. We have Dungeoneer Maeve and advisors Christina, David and Lee. And let's be honest, we're not going to get much chance to get to know them this episode either.
Nope, not a bit of that. They do not last long.
That's not really a spoiler to say that.
I don't think it is, actually. I think most people watching them would probably realise fairly quickly that they're not going to last terribly long. There might be a lot more to them than we see here, but there's not a great deal to say. I think we've established that Maeve can be a little bit impatient, but as we will see throughout the quest, they are very, very badly disorganised, and they do seem to have an attention problem.
Yeah, usually you'll see a specific advisor will come up on top, the alpha advisor, so to speak. Doesn't happen here at all. In fact, they just all talk at once, and I can't blame Maeve for being impatient.
We have to keep in mind at all times when watching the first season, most of the teams will have had no experience actually watching Nightmare at this point, and so they might not have figured out ways to organise themselves in advance. So I think that definitely shows here. There is definitely a serious problem with everybody basically wanting to do their own thing and getting in each other's way. And there are a couple of times in the episode where Maeve almost seems to lose her temper with it.
Yes, I think we also have to realise that whilst, yes, these are kids, We're doing our best not to punch down. But good God, this team makes it difficult sometimes.
They are, yes, that's the word. Yes, they are phenomenally disorganized. They're one of the worst organized teams ever. And slight spoiler here, they make one of the worst mistakes in the history of Nightmare, and it should be a much more famous death than it is. Because it's stretched out over 2 different scenes, it doesn't have the impact that it should do, because it is actually a gigantic blunder.
Yeah, we're talking Simon sidestep to your left levels of blunder here.
Reference to season 4 that a number of veteran Nightmare fans will be nodding their heads vigorously at as they're listening. Very famous death, that one.
Where am I?
And sure enough, Maeve walks straight into a bomb room. I mean, this is spectacularly bad, isn't it? Not the room itself. I mean, I know I've said before I have an issue with bomb rooms.
The room is the same as it was in the first quest. There's nothing wrong with that. Problem is them. It is spectacularly bad.
They can't even get her pointed in the right direction.
That's a repeated theme throughout the rather small number of minutes their quest lasts.
Yes.
Yeah, they're very, very badly organised. You can hear them talking over each other repeatedly. I say talking, let's be honest, yelling. There's clearly been no delegation of roles here. We think there should be one guy or girl who does most of the guiding. One of them does the describing, and the other one does all the other bit jobs like the spell casting. At best, what they do in the first few seasons is they just take turns to describe, and then in a panic situation like this, everybody suddenly just forgets to sit back and let one person do it, and so they end up just talking over each other and giving contradictory instructions to the Dungeoneer. It's a mess.
But somehow they do actually make it out of the chamber before the bomb goes off.
I think that's because the bomb doesn't have one of those rather weird tricks where the fuse suddenly goes back. It happens. It happens.
We're in a room with a fireplace, 2 doors, and something's obstructing it. Oh, it's fallen down. Right.
Warning team, worms be present on level 1. All contact is deadly. Those who linger longer in this chamber may linger forever.
Trigod warns us that worms be present in level 1. All contact is deadly, and those that linger in this chamber may linger forever. So what do? They almost walk us straight into it.
Yeah, it has to be said, linger in this chamber forever is very nearly what they did anyway, because it seemed to take them that long to figure out how to get out. Guys, look at that big door in the right corner of the room. Try walking towards it. Again, you've got to take into account the kids. You've got to take into account that this technology was awesome in 1987. But at the same time, looking at it in the cold light of day, that snake is clearly just a video recording. It was a video recording taken at least weeks earlier, possibly years earlier. I had no idea where they got the recording from. The snake is not actually present in the room. If you want to avoid it, the trick you pull is just don't walk towards it. That's it. That's all you got to do to avoid it. Just walk into part of the room where it isn't and then just head straight for the door. But they seem to take it slightly too literally. They're assuming that the stake is really there almost. It's before CGI had reached a level where they could do this convincingly. So all they could do was put video recordings there. And the video recording is by definition not going to react to what the Dungeoneer does. So if you just walk away from the video recording is going to stay in the same part of the room. So if they just cool down a little bit there, just let one person speak, very important, just let one person give the instructions, and just remember, the snake can't actually see you, it cannot actually follow you. They'd have got out just fine, but instead they panic like bitches.
What gets me is when Christina suddenly forgets her left from her right, almost guides Maeve into the snake, and then seems to almost blame Maeve for it.
Yeah, that is another thing about it. It's not the most even-tempered team, and it's not really a team. In fact, I think that sums it up even more. They're not working as a team. They're not working together. They're constantly working against each other. And then, as you say, we've got an example of them finger-pointing, which is always a sign of a badly knit team.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest, if they weren't talking after.
There is a story said, I think it was from season 4, that one advisor got beaten up.
Oh, really?
Got punched by his teammates after he made a magnificent blunder.
Kids, please don't punch each other. Thank you.
Yeah. They're not a team though. Is the fundamental here.
Yeah.
And they're a rabble. I think is probably the correct word for it. It's not just in Nightmare. In any team sport, when people are pointing fingers at each other, you know that they're not working as a team. That was quite evident here.
Maeve is obviously quite annoyed by all this because at one point she turns around so fast she almost falls over.
Under the helmet, the Dungeoneer has got a little earpiece so they can hear the advisors telling them what to do. I think she's hearing a lot of panic in the earpiece she's wearing under the helmet. She's possibly also confused by contradictory orders, and so she's about to go one way, and then suddenly another advisor says, "Go right," and so she tries to go the other way, and then wobbling. Again, it's a sign this is not a well-prepared unit.
Where am I? You're in a green room with a table on. Now if you go forward. I can see the table.
So, we're now back to a more familiar chamber here. It's the level 1 clue room. It's exactly the same room that we saw in the first quest. On the table is some bread, a block of soap, a comb, and a gold bar. And the team advised Maeve to take the bread. She puts it in a knapsack. I want to just say at this point, it would be very funny if a Dungeoneer literally tried to eat one of the food objects. As far as I know, they were actually made of wax. So it might have been quite amusing.
You have delayed too long in this chamber. The manifestation is now occurring. Stand quite still, Dungeoneer.
But no sooner has Maeve taken the bread than a wall monster appears. Traegard tells the team this is Olgarth, to which the wall monster replies that he is not Olgarth, but Granitas of legend, and that he objects to being likened to the Jurassic has-been.
We all know where we're going with this bit, don't we?
Yeah.
With Granite Arse. It's a joke, I am embarrassed to say, that missed me completely back in 1987 and in 1988 when he continued appearing. It's so obvious now. I don't know quite how I missed it. Ass to me back then basically meant donkey. I very rarely use the term in the bottom sense that it was used in America at the time.
So a granite arse could be a concrete donkey then.
What's that?
Yes. So that's obviously what it means. There's no secondary meaning to there at all. It definitely means concrete donkey. Yeah, it was a sign of one of Nightmare's more interesting tendencies, which is, yes, obviously the visuals by the standards of the 1980s are amazing. It was really pushing the technical boundaries like no other show on television. But it was also pushing back other boundaries, and there are times when you do rather wonder about that. Remembering that it was usually on at 20 to 5 in the afternoon, it can be rather surprising the language that was used occasionally. Especially in the later seasons, there were a number of examples of the dialogue getting a little bit rude, shall we say. There was a couple of occasions in season 8 where the characters were referring to each other as a smart-ass and things like that. Not sure it was really necessary, probably inviting more trouble than it was worth. I suppose it was worth testing the water though.
What about the salt?
I have riddles of different kinds, of different legends.
Just like Olgarth before him, Granitas gives us the same spiel about having 3 riddles. 1 correct answer will allow them to pass, 2 grants them a clue, and with 3 correct riddles, 3 correct answers I should say, they may command him, failure to answer any riddles correctly, and he'll feed on them. It's close to verbatim to what Olgarth said in the first quest. And then Traegard, just to rub home the point, then goes and says exactly the same thing.
To be fair though, this team may have needed it.
I'm not sure they deserved it though. There does seem to be a problem watching them that they don't, as I mentioned earlier, they seem to have an attention difficulty, this lot. You look at them as Traegard is repeating everything that the Wall Monster just said. They don't appear to be listening.
Yeah, exactly.
This is a problem which is, I think, is the fundamental weakness that actually beats them. They're not really paying attention to what Traegard says, as becomes painfully obvious during the riddle contest. They're not quite taking in anything that's being said to them. So, yeah, you could argue that they probably needed it to be repeated, but I don't think they deserve to get it explained to them again.
And it didn't really matter because they didn't listen to it the second time.
Well, precisely. If you're not listening, it's your own fault, I think, is the fundamental for me. It doesn't make good television because this is only the second quest. And we've already had the rules for a riddle contest explained to us 4 times! That's, given that the riddle contest probably lasts about 3 or 4 minutes, and we're only 30 minutes into Nightmare's history, that's getting on to a quarter of Nightmare's history taken up on explaining the riddle contest rules. Let's get over it and move on, guys. Come on.
So, on to our first riddle.
What runs yet has no legs and has a bed but never rests?
Yeah, I think most people could get the answer for this one. It is a river. And to be fair, the team get it, no problem. But then Maeve wants out of there immediately, doesn't she?
Yeah, it's again a sign that they weren't really paying attention to what anyone was saying to them. They had explained to them twice in just a space of a few seconds. There are 3 riddles, not 1 riddle. 3 riddles.
Maeve's just like, I don't need no stinking riddles.
That will be it. Yeah, and then Maeve just decides after 1 riddle that it's time to go. No! Pay attention, girl! 3! It's 3 riddles, not 1.
But she does actually decide to stay for the rest of the riddles.
That's very considerate of her.
And the next riddle is...
What is the man-like monster of the snows whose face and form nobody knows?
Yeah, the answer they give is abominable snowman. Terrible trouble pronouncing abominable. I don't. It keeps coming as abominable.
It is an abominable word to pronounce.
It is. Boom boom. Boom boom is also a joke because we had a bomb room a couple of. I'll move on. The correct answer technically is actually the Yeti, but abominable snowman is sort of the name that kids give it. So the next riddle is
name me now the sword that was found in stone yet lost in water.
Now, we were talking earlier and they answered what we consider would be the correct answer from their point of view.
Yeah, and clearly from the writer's point of view as well. But it depends. We're discussing the Arthurian legend, obviously, and the answer that most people would give to that, the great majority of people would give it, is Excalibur. Most people know versions of the Arthurian legend where the sword in the stone was Excalibur, and then it was thrown into the lake, and the Lady of the Lake caught it and drew it under the water. That does exist in a lot of versions of the legend, but actually there's a number of versions of the legend, a lot of the older versions of the Arthurian legend, where the sword in the stone was actually a separate weapon. In those versions, Arthur draws the sword, becomes king of the Britons, but then Merlin decides that he needs a more powerful sword, and he takes him to the lake, and the Lady of the Lake presents the sword to Arthur then, and that's why Arthur then has it thrown back, when he dies, has it thrown back into the lake, so as to make sure that it's returned to its rightful owner or its rightful guardian. So strictly speaking, we're talking about the versions written by Geoffrey of Monmouth from the old Welsh legends, and the La Mort d'Arthur as written by Sir Thomas Malory in the 15th century. In those versions, and certainly in the earlier versions, Excalibur and the Sword and Stone are actually 2 separate weapons. So strictly speaking, the answer chosen is wrong. But there's no other answer, of course.
So the team got all 3 riddles correct and are told that all that glitters is not gold, yet those who use foul language may need to wash their mouths out.
We don't do that.
I'm actually quite intrigued as to what that would have led to be honest, if they had got that far.
Yeah, what exactly was the use for the block of soap is basically the question. There was a very foul-mouthed character in season 6 called Elita, called a cabin elf, who could be pretty rude. And in the first couple of seasons, there was also a monk called Cedric, who was famously, became kind of famous for being extremely rude to Dungeoneers and very abusive to them. Cedric's probably the likelier candidate here because, as far as we know, Elita didn't exist at this back in the first couple of seasons. Why would you need a block of soap for Cedric, though? You get the feeling it had to be some kind of magical metaphor thing rather than he's attacking you with a quarterstaff and you throw a block of soap at him. I think that would be a no contest, really. So I think it must have been something magical about the soap.
Treguard reminds the team that they can command Granitas, and so they do so. Granitas repeats that all that glitters is not gold, and she that lies in wait values her appearance more than base metal. What do you think actually happened here? Do you think that they got confused and counted the bread as an object?
Right, well, just to make clear to the listeners, anyone who hasn't actually watched this episode of Nightmare before, this is the blunder we're talking about earlier, the gigantic blunder that really should be much, much more famous than it is. What they've done is, they've missed what was glaringly obvious from the 2 clues they got. Now, the first clue actually was enough on its own to tell them what they need to do. It's wonderful when you get what I call a negative clue. A negative clue, it doesn't tell you which object to take, it tells you which object you shouldn't take. And as there's only 3 objects and you're allowed to take 2 of them, that means if you get a negative clue, you just know, leave out the one that it's telling you not to take and just take the other 2, and you're laughing. You don't actually need the second clue particularly. It helps a little bit but to clarify, but that it isn't really needed. Question it, as you say, is why did they therefore come to the ludicrous conclusion that they should only take 1 object? When they haven't got, and they're not carrying anything else. Your theory, and it's as good a theory as any, I suppose, is that when they took the loaf of bread, they assumed that was their first object. They again would suggest that this is a team that isn't really paying attention, because it says very, very clearly in the Adventurer's Code leaflet they're given before starting that food goes in the knapsack and 2 objects are treated separately. So they just so if that is the case, again, they just weren't listening to the dungeon master.
And yeah, he even tries to remind them.
He doesn't look very impressed when he realizes they're not listening to him, does he?
Oh, the look he gives them.
Oh yeah.
That would shatter stone, that look.
He was clearly thinking, what are you guys doing? You can take a second object, and it's been made clear to you which one you shouldn't take.
In fairness to them, if they genuinely believed they could only take 1 object, I can see why they took the soap based on the clues.
Oh yeah, I can see that, yeah.
But they could have taken 2 objects.
Unless they genuinely thought that the bread counted as one of the objects, there is literally no explanation for why they did it, because what do you lose by taking a second object? You know, if it's a harmful object, you'll find out as soon as you pick it up, and the answer is you just put it back down again. If it's not a harmful object, you might find there's no use for it but in the end, but that just means you put it down at the end of the level and carry on. There's no harm in taking the second object, but they just leave it. As I say, if, as you're suggesting, they thought the bread was the object, as I say, that's still a huge blunder, because it means they hadn't really studied the Adventurer's Code correctly. I don't like this team. I thought I'd better clarify that. Not on a personal level. I just think as a team, they're awful. They're just awful.
Where am I? Don't go any further.
So, Maeve emerges into the Serpent's Mouth Cavern. Lovely, lovely sight. Even if this feels slightly samey with the earlier quest, it's still a great chamber. Beautiful chamber.
I never get bored of seeing the Serpent's Mouth.
We'd actually outlasted Lilith. She's still here at this point, but it carried on after she left the dungeon. Interestingly, Maeve, when she arrives, is so far forward she almost steps off the edge of the ledge there. She takes a step backwards, so she needs to ask the others whether she should do that.
Yeah, it's the panic in her voice as well. She's like, there's a big chasm at your feet. At my feet! At my feet!
Yes, so, to be fair, if I had advisors like that a lot, I'd be pretty nervous as well. Anyway, Lilith is here, and this is an example of what I was saying in the first podcast about, I'm not sure about the way she was written would have been allowed today. Once again, she's being portrayed as a stereotype of feminine vanity, in inverted commas, because she's making a big fuss about being seen with her hair a bit untidy, which does seem superficial.
Lilith says that she's prepared to forgive Maeve if she is able to present her with a gift. And it is at this point that the team collectively realised they should have actually listened to Granitas and taken the comb and the soap.
Oh, dear. A block of soap?
A block of soap? Kindly explain how I am to comb my hair with that. Oh, dragon's breath. I lose all patience with you. I will just have to throw you out. I have no time for those who bumble, so boulders crack and that ledge crumble! Nice of you to drop in.
I mean, there really is no question this loss was well-deserved.
Totally. Kids or not, they are a bad team, this lot. They really are. Poorly organised. They talk over each other. They don't listen. They don't listen to the dungeon master. They don't listen to the wall monster. They don't listen to each other. And that's why they end up talking over each other all the time and giving completely contradictory instructions. And they basically got exactly as far as they deserved to get, about halfway through level 1, and that's about, they deserve to get no further. They were a bad team. The only good thing you can say for them was at least they managed to get all 3 riddles right. But that's about it.
Book smarts, but not dungeon smarts.
Precisely.
Oh dear, what a pity. Never mind.
I love the way he says it. He had 2 big catchphrases. The more famous one, which everybody knows and loves, is "Ooh, nasty." But in the early years, it was much likelier to say, "Oh dear, what a pity. Never mind." And he is clearly loving every second of it. And it was a great way of underlining just how sinister he could be.
It's very Gene Wilder as Willy Wonka. Help, police, murder.
Don't do it. Stop. Come back. Yeah, it was. I've often wanted to meet Hugo Myatt and ask him, did you get some of the characteristics of Treguard from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory? Because there were so many similarities, and the way that they've both been very clearly set up to be someone the audience don't know that they can trust or not. There's that same slight he's out for himself elements there, which you depend on him. The contestants depend on him as they're going through this labyrinth of dangers, but at the same time they can't quite trust him. They don't quite know his intentions, and that makes it actually far scarier. Treguard is actually, in some ways, is actually scarier than the arch villain at this time, because the most dangerous place for any position, any opponent to be, is behind you, where they can stab you in the back. Mogdred is always in front of them. Treguard is sitting behind them. So, and that, what a pity, never mind, really, really plays up that side of it.
Treguard points out that it was obvious that they should have taken the comb, and that their adventure has now come to an end. We were reminded that, although Maeve perished in the dungeon, she has survived in our reality and is waiting for her teammates to join her.
Spellcasting. DISMISS.
Now, as we were saying before, this is really important, this bit.
Yes. As much as kids love being scared, and that is definitely true, at the same time, you don't want them to believe it completely. You do need to sort of reassure them, because otherwise, after a while, they probably would become traumatized by it.
Treguard bids farewell to the team and then says something I half agree with and half don't.
You did well, but I'm afraid you fell from grace.
You did well.
I've literally got written here, did they?
Yeah, I was thinking of another word beginning with B, but this one ends with T. He is right when he says after that, in the second half of the sentence, you fell from grace. I think that is pretty self-evident. I would say they did about as well as they deserved to.
I think that's fair.
Again, we don't want to slap down here, but we're not a good team.
And no sooner has the team began to journey back home than we are introduced to a new team.
Enter, stranger. Who dares the dungeon next?
Simon Nichols.
Well, stand not on ceremony then, or time becomes our enemy. Call your advisors to us now.
Simon, Johnathan, Stephen, come.
In comes Dungeoneer Simon Nichols and his advisors, Simon, Johnathan, and Stephen.
So again, we've got two with the same name, Simon and Simon.
Can't say much to the imagination of British parents back in the 1970s, is there?
No. So, Martin, do you have anything to say about this team from the offset?
I actually do genuinely rate this team as actually a pretty good one. Had they had the experience of watching Nightmare a year earlier, they would almost certainly have got some way into level 3, this lot. For a start, Simon Nichols himself is actually a fairly assertive Dungeoneer. He gets into the role a bit more. He isn't quite as awkward or self-conscious as a lot of other Dungeoneers, so he speaks up a little bit more. Certainly compared with the first two teams, these ones are clearly much more effective. They seem better organised. They seem to have a bit more gumption, a bit more brains about them. They seem able to guide the Dungeoneer a hell of a lot more smoothly than the first two teams. And there's a bit more about them than anybody else. And it does show, even if you haven't watched Nightmare before, you can actually be good at it anyway. We've been mentioning in defence of the first two teams for not being particularly good. Well, we've got to remember they hadn't watched it before, which is true. But then, as far as we know, Simon Nichols' team didn't either. And they did a hell of a lot better. Although, one thing I must say, they did make a pretty stupid blunder at the end. end of their quest, but we'll come to that later.
Traegod equips Dungeoneer Simon with the knapsack and the helmet, explains how the life force works, and sends him into the dungeon.
Turn then, face the door, and take a step forward.
Where am I? You're in a room with 4 exits in the wall you're facing. 3 of them, a grill has just appeared across them, so you can't get out of them. And then the 3rd one, there's a large gold keyhole in it.
So, guess where we are right now?
Let me have a pause and think about it. I may have to look this up. It's season 1, and it's the very first chamber of a quest. I've nearly got it. Are we in the 4 doors chamber by any chance? It was still very experimental at this stage of the program. Again, it started here. It's basically the same puzzle again, really. What they got is portcullises over every door, and you've got to do a floor puzzle to open one of them. And the puzzle has actually been altered again. Remember the first one, you had the letters O-P-E-N on the floor. Second one had the letter spelling out sesame on the floor. This time, it's just 3 pieces of the image of a key. I don't think they did it to make it easier. I think they just did it to make it quicker. They could just as easily have put the letters K, E, and Y on the floor. The important thing was, it got the Dungeoneer out of that room quickly. The reality is, it's just a room with 4 doors. It is a very common chamber, but it's also a very nondescript chamber, and there's not really anything going on in it.
So the team have absolutely no trouble this time, and Simon is through to the next area within record time.
Where am I? You're on a ledge. It's a ledge around the edge of a cavern, and off the edge of the ledge is a large giant's head, so you've got to be quiet as well.
So Traegod states that it hasn't taken the team long to get into trouble, and says that one of the problems with dungeons is that things do generally tend to get shut up in them. You've got some thoughts on this actually being a dungeon, actually acting like a dungeon.
Yes, this is the first instance we've seen of the dungeon actually being used in such a way.
Yeah, people tend to forget when watching Nightmare that the idea of a dungeon is it's a sort of the medieval equivalent, the nearest equivalent there was in the medieval era of a prison, and so things should get locked away inside it. It does happen a little bit in the title sequence. You do have that image of some kind of dwarf character with cross eyes peering out of a cell door in the side of the hill. In the 2nd season and the 3rd season, we also get a couple of quests to free the maid, which means that, in a manner of speaking, somebody's been imprisoned in the dungeon that way, in that sense. But here, it's actually explicitly described as the giant getting shut up inside the dungeon. I do rather wonder how a giant managed to get fitted into a dungeon. That's where he is.
I'm assuming there's a magical means.
There must be.
But I suppose technically, Dungeoneer Simon's been shut up in the dungeon as well, especially in the first chamber. I mean, that door is locked.
Sort of. Maybe that was the whole trick. Maybe it's just to trick people who don't know that they're guilty of crimes into going into the dungeon and getting themselves locked in. And all this adventure stuff is just something that they're hallucinating.
Fun and adventure and really wild things.
Yeah.
Go away, humans. Humans is nuisance.
The giant here is played by actor Edmund Dane, who gets more roles. He plays Gumboil the Guard, and he also in season 2 he plays a voiceless character called the Automaton, or the Mindless Mechanical Warrior, as Traegod likes to call it.
These monsters is monstrous, and you can tread on them. Humans is just too small.
The actual scene itself isn't particularly good. It's trying to be funny by having this rather silly idea that if the giant sneezes while the human's in the room, it'll get smashed against the wall. Be still, my splitting sides. It's a bit childish, really, that scene. It doesn't exactly have you sitting on the edge of your seat, waiting and wondering to see whether he gets out in time.
The way I see it, it's a bomb room, basically, but just slightly better done.
I don't know about better done.
Well, you know my issue with bomb rooms.
Yeah, I know, but a bomb blowing up is more threatening than somebody sneezing. Oh, admittedly, as at the time of recording, we're going through the coronavirus crisis, so at the moment that may not be true. But as I haven't heard Traegod saying, "Don't be in the room when the giant sneezes; he might give you COVID-19."
I think I'm going to sneeze now. Sorry, Master.
Emergency exit fast, Simon. This is no joking matter.
The team just guides Simon out of the room as quickly as possible. As I say, not that difficult because it is just a straight line along the ledge.
Okay, well, now where am I? You're in a room with a bricked-up door in the far wall, and on the right wall there's an open doorway. There's a window in the left wall, and there's a table with some objects in the centre of the room.
We're into the level 1 clue room again, and on the table this time is a pie, a symbol of sort, a key, and a silk cloth. And of course the pie goes straight into the knapsack, and we get the now familiar routine.
You have delayed.
Blah, 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 blah.
My reckoning is they were only in the chamber about 12 seconds this time.
Yeah.
You could set it to music, actually, couldn't you? You could set your watch by it. The wall monster appears, and Tragar tells the team it's probably Granite Arse again, but don't laugh at the name because Granite Arse doesn't have a sense of humour. And of course it isn't Granite Arse, it's Olgarth again. He tells us that Granite Arse is mere clay by comparison, and then we get into another riddle contest. It's noticeable looking at this, when Olgarth materialises in the wall, they seem to have superimposed his image differently again.
Yeah, it definitely seems to have been improved.
Yeah, I think in the first one you could only just make him out. It was so faint. When Granitas appeared in the second one, he was quite well defined. Here, I think there's more of the image actually been put in, but they blurred it in some way as well. So he's not quite as well defined, but at the same time there's actually more feature there, if you get my meaning.
He's not doing that sucking thing anymore either.
That helps, yeah. I think they realised that because they're only using one puppet or mask, whatever it was, for the War Monster, they've got to find a way of making them look different without coming up with anything different to work it with. So what they've done is they make Granitas bigger by including more of his face and by having him in better focus, and they make Olgarth more blurred so that the massive crack in the forehead, for instance, isn't as visible when it's Olgarth. For all of that, you can still tell very, very, very easily that it's the same mask that they're using, and you can still see the crack in the same place. It's just a bit more blurred out now.
And moving on with the riddles.
The blade that cuts may feed the cow, the friend that trusts may break a vow. 'Tis all the same when common said, so give the name of nature's bed.
You only really need the last bit of that riddle, give the name of nature's bed. It should be pretty obvious. You can interpret the riddle as meaning soil or dirt. And in fact, I think one of the advisors actually suggested dirt. If you actually pay attention to the rest of it, this is why the rest of it probably does need to be in there. There are little references to grass. For instance, the blade that cuts may feed the cow. The blade is a blade of grass. You feed a cow with grass. 'Tis all the same when common said. Again, a common is another word for a field. So it's actually is trying to drive you towards saying grass rather than soil. But having said that, if it was up to me and the Dungeoneer had said soil, I'd have probably said, you know what, that's actually fair enough.
Don't understand the middle part. I mean, this might just be me being ignorant, but the friend that trusts may break a vow. Do you think that's just filler?
That is, yeah. It was the only thing they could come up with to rhyme with cow, as far as I can tell. I don't think they could think up anything related to grass for that particular bit. If anybody listening to this can figure out what any link to grass from the friend that trusts may break a vow, then by all means tell us. What's the Twitter address, by the way, Mr. Harder?
The Twitter address is @NightmarePod, with a K, obviously.
We said that purely for practical reasons and in no way to plug ourselves.
Of course.
So anyway, they got it right anyway. They said grass. So on to the second riddle.
4 elements fashioned me. Name all 4, or else avaunt thee.
And if a scientist, especially a chemist, was watching this, they would have an apoplectic fit, of course, because the answer, and they do get this right, is the earth, fire, wind, and water.
Go planet!
But as I say, scientists must hate this. If any of them have seen this episode of Nightmare, they must hate it, because to teach kids that there's only 4 elements is so bad for their education.
What is laid and served is not a table, but almost a bird.
Pretty obvious one, that one. The main reason why he might have trouble with it is because the muffling effect on his voice is rather overdone during this episode, and he might not have made out what first few words were. It's an egg, of course.
And Simon knows that, yeah.
3 is the score. You may know more.
Olgarth tells the team that the key to the door is not always key-shaped.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love a negative clue. They now know which 2 objects just from that.
Again, Tragar reminds the team that a perfect score means that they can command Olgarth and he must answer. Olgarth gives them the clue that she who lies in wait smiles on those who bear her favour. The team work out that the silk cloth is the lady's favour, and so take that and the symbol.
Again, it's a superfluous second clue. They already know which single item they need to reject. It doesn't doesn't hurt having that extra bit of clarification, but
It does at least let them know which item to offer.
they should be able to work that out for themselves, really, anyway, shouldn't they? Everybody knows the name for a lady's symbol is often called a favour. They throw a cloth or a handkerchief at a knight's feet. That is her favour. In fact, if I remember rightly, Lilith actually says to them that it's her favour.
Simon leaves the room, but somehow does so without getting anywhere near the door.
That happens a lot in Nightmare. As far as I can tell, it's just the producer saying, look, let's not fuss about being too precise. It gets boring to watch. Let's just assume they're walking in the right line. It really doesn't matter.
They emerge into the next chamber, which is a bomb room. Bum 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 room. Be fast on your feet before your life was complete. Bum room. Bum 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 room. They navigate this one quite quickly. He comes in, they turn left, he's towards the door.
We've got somebody who's actually managed to walk out of a bomb room quickly.
Technically, it actually takes them over a week.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. They actually took 7 days longer than everybody else. It was possible for early teams to be good at manoeuvring, be decisive, and to see what needed to be done and get on with it. It does prove that by any standards, the first two teams weren't very good, even by the standards of limitation that existed in the first season, through not having been able to watch the series before. Early teams could still do a good job, and this team are already showing the first two how it's done.
So they go to exit the bomb room, but before they actually get there...
Warning, team. Complete temporal disruption approaching. Time is now the enemy. Oh dear. Temporal disruption complete.
Temporal disruption occurs.
It's a pity about that, but it's why I do actually have a decent regard for Simon Nichols and this team. I actually do think they were a good side, and if they'd had the benefit of doing their quest in the second or third season, when they'd have had the experience of watching the show in advance, I think they'd have done very, very well. They still did pretty well.
Yeah, I'm just going to put people out of their misery just in case they're on tender hooks. No one in Series 1 actually completed it. Some people got really far, like almost got there, but no one actually defeated the dungeon.
No, it took a while for a first champion. It's interesting looking at this episode as a whole. Although a lot of the stuff in it is the same again, we've got a couple of new rooms here, but basically it's the same stuff all over again. There's a retread. At the same time, there is a very interesting contrast provided simply by the fact that the teams are so different. The first team, as I think we've made clear now, we think were atrocious, but the second team in the episode, as we say, I think was actually pretty competent. They move quicker, they make decisions quicker, they get from place to place quicker, and that means you've got a faster program, and therefore it becomes less dull. Yes, they're helped by the fact that the opening chamber, their floor puzzle was quicker to solve, I'll give you that, but at the same time they did get on with it. You know, they didn't waste any time waiting for Traegar to prompt them or anything. The first half of this episode is rather irritating to watch, and gets the audience going, oh, for God's sake, you bunch of meatheads. The second half, you actually really rather get into it, because this isn't actually that bad a team. Although, say it again, when their quest does come to an end, they do make a pretty silly mistake.
And on that note, that's the end of this episode of the podcast. I've been Martin Harder.
And I've been Martin Softer.
I hate you sometimes.
So that's the end of this podcast on episode 2 of Nightmare. He was Martin Harder.
And he was Martin O'Donier.
So don't have nightmares.
Just watch them instead.
Bye for now.
If you'd like to contact the podcast, you can email us on broomcupboardclub@gmail.com, and you can follow us on Twitter. We're NightmarePod. We'd especially like to hear from you if you've been involved in the programme in some way, be it as a contestant, an actor, or behind the scenes. We really want to hear from you.